Former Green Bay Packers quarterback Brett Favre says he has Parkinson's disease and concussions could be part of the story. I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green. This episode of Right Angle is brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. And gentlemen, we're not going to go into depth about Brett's condition. We just found out about this, but I do want to use this as a jumping off point for a larger discussion. This weekend I was watching a football game and they had this graphic on the screen showing 3 players on one of the teams that were going to be out for the week, and 2 of them were going to be out because of concussions. And then I hear this story about Brett Favre. He was quoted, by the way, in an interview from 2018 saying, when you have ringing of the ears, seeing stars, that's a concussion, he told the Today Show back in 2018. And if that is a concussion, I've had hundreds, maybe thousands throughout my career, which is frightening. And Bill Whittle, you don't have to be a huge football fan to start asking some questions about this sport, which I will say I love. I was raised by a man who not only played football up to the semi-pro level and coached everything from 7-year-olds up to semi-pro football, but did that for some 35 or 40 years. Football was a regular in our home, and on our evenings, we played all the time. So this is really hard for me to say, Bill, but for the first time today, I started wondering if maybe I might want to find some other sport where people aren't beating each other over the head so violently. Not that my watching of TV is supporting that activity that much, but it's hard to put that out of my mind when I see some of these high impact collisions. Do you think I'm being unreasonably sensitive to this, or is there a case to be made that maybe a little less football and a little more of something less injurious?
I don't think you're being overly sensitive. I just think it's straight up communism. You can just barely see. I didn't say I was going to watch soccer. You can just you've just come halfway back into the light. You can just barely see the orange and blue Gator football I have there up on my table back there. When we were talking about this, I had a thought while you were speaking, and my thought is this: I spent 3 wonderful months in Australia. I love the Australian people. I spent 3 months in Brisbane down there, had a great time in Brisbane. And I watched Australian football and I watched a fair amount of rugby. And everybody says rugby is much more exciting than American football because American football is constantly stopping and rugby is constantly in motion. And I watched about 20 minutes of a rugby game and I just said, rugby is essentially just a 60-minute long fumble recovery, near as I can tell.
Yes. It's the plays that make football exciting. Each play is a little story.
Exactly. But here's my point. The amount of physical protection that rugby players wear is essentially nothing. Yeah. Sometimes you'll have guys wearing ear caps, but they're not wearing pads. And you'd think that the injuries in rugby would be much greater, but I believe they're actually much less. And the reason that they're much less is because they're not wearing armor.
Yeah.
Our football players wear armor, and the thought occurred to me as you were doing your introduction, Scott, that as our armor gets better and better and better, instead of protecting people more, it may be simply allowing a larger level of impact dynamics. Yeah. You got 2 guys who weigh 280 pounds who are some of the fastest humans in the world hitting each other head on. You never see that in rugby. You will never see a head-on tackle in rugby. It's always a tackle because it split their heads wide open. There have been tremendous advances in the science of concussion avoidance. In fact, the newest helmets that you see out there seem to have like a compressible flap here to reduce some of that impact as well. But ultimately, when it's all said and done, my position on this is it's a rough game, and that's why people like to watch it. And no one's forcing anybody to play it. And the people who play it on the highest levels, on the levels where you're most likely to get injured, which is in the NFL, are some of the most highly paid individuals on the planet. And even if they weren't, they'd still be playing football. I don't think the answer is to walk back football. I think you could probably go further with some of the designs on these safety things. I think it would be a little silly if they all run around on the field looking like, Dark Helmet from Spaceballs. So I think you could probably take that too far. One of the things that's done the most to protect players has been just changes, relatively minor changes to the rules. Spearing is, you used to be able to just spear people, you just hit them with the head, right smack into them. That is now a 15-yard penalty, and in egregious cases get you thrown out of the game. That kind of thing helps. The amount of penalties that are thrown for roughing the quarterback have increased and may need to increase a little bit further. I'm astonished to hear. Look, I'm a football fan like anybody else. So one of the most amazing things about being a quarterback is not just their skill, but their courage. I mean, they've got to accurately unload this pass, knowing that this creature is bearing down on them, and they're going to release that ball 0.2 of a second before, and they can't throw and brace. They're just plain going to get hit. And for Brett Favre, Bart Starr, Brett Favre, Packers.
Showing your age.
But for Brett Favre to say that he's seen stars thousands of times really was quite a shock to me. I would have said maybe 4 or 5 times he got hit that hard. There may be a solution in modifying the kind of ways that you can tackle a quarterback, rather than just flying through the air and knocking him down. Because I don't believe that linemen suffer nearly so many concussions because they simply don't have enough time to build up the energy to hit that hard. But overall, I'm not in favor of changing the game of football, and this is a high risk environment. There are people who work on oil derricks who suffer grievous injuries, and they get paid well for the risks that they take. And I would hate to see football become not a rough sport. It's a physical contact sport. That's the visceral appeal of it. It's an essential part of American culture. So I would say, by all means, do all these things. And I might just close this little rant by saying it is also conceivable that Brett Favre's Parkinson's has nothing to do with concussions whatsoever.
Stephen Green, the NFL has tried over the years and is trying again even now to aggressively market itself in other countries. It is still, even though when you win the Super Bowl, you're considered the world champion, it's just because nobody else is doing it anywhere else in the world. Yeah. Their latest target is Brazil, and they played one of the early season games this season in Brazil, and they've played in Japan and England and Germany and other places trying to spread this around the world. But apparently, I'm hearing through back channels that it's really hard to engage people, especially in so-called civilized countries, in Europe, for example, because of the brutality of the game and because of, it's not something that you need a whole pipeline to run a professional football program, and it starts with 6-7-year-olds. And it's not something that parents want their kids to do because they associate head injuries and concussions and such with this. I heard this weekend something I'm sure all our listeners knew, but I did not know, in that there is a professional flag football league. Now, the way they danced around the subject, I think Chris Collinsworth, the commentator, was talking about it. I get the
You mean Florida Gators, Chris Collinsworth?
I get the sense that it's a women's sport, but they didn't come right out and say that, I think, because you're not alled to anymore.
Are you talking about the lingerie bowl?
No, I don't think it's that.
I'm a big supporter.
No, and those aren't flags, Steve. That's their clothing. You don't pull on that.
No, that's the beauty of it.
I love flag football. I thought the flag football was so much fun.
So anyway, apparently there is a professional flag football league that somebody plays. Do you think the NFL can ever do enough to protect players, or do we need to move in the direction of less high-impact activities?
First, I just want to say that growing up, it was I wanted to love football, but it was very difficult because I grew up in St. Louis in the 70s and 80s when we had the Cardinals. and the Jim Hart era, all that. And their nickname was the Cardiac Cards, and the saying was they were always one play short of a great comeback. This was not the best team in the NFL. In fact, Bill Bidwell, the owner / a-hole, finally moved the team to Arizona, I think in the late 80s, and they still haven't won a Super Bowl. I don't believe. They're just it's a cursed team, and as long as they're in Arizona, I hope the curse continues, because Bill Bidwell was just a jerk when he moved that team out of the city. Anyway, I learned to love it when I was going to this junior high and high school, where they required everybody, I think, through your sophomore year of high school, so like starting in 5th grade, you had a choice in the fall semester. You could play football or water polo. So I was playing football, even though I was a short, scrawny kid. I didn't hit my growth spurt till like sophomore year. And I did not make the varsity team. I did not make the junior varsity team. I was on one of the 2 intramural squads that, we just played each other every afternoon after school. But for some reason, the coach decided that this 95-pound, 5-foot-tall kid was going to play nose guard. And it turned out I was actually, as long as, I was playing kids my size, back then, I was actually okay at it. I was pretty good at sneaking through and getting through to the quarterback, and I really learned to love football for a couple of years. And then that 3rd year I went to that school, I got sick of it, and I thought, I'll go out for water polo. That'll be much easier. And boy, was that a mistake. Football, you got to play for 15, 20 seconds at a time. Water polo, man, you are out there treading water for the whole damn time, and it's hard and it's work, and there are bigger kids trying to drown you. Football's awesome. No, don't play water polo. And the reason I mention this is I also grew up with an incident of Parkinson's disease. This was my great grandmother who developed senile dementia and Parkinson's at the same time, and so watching her decline was not an easy thing. And so my hearts go out not just to the players but to their families, because especially Brett Favre, who's just a national treasure. I mean, You put him in, there's something about Marion. I think that was Brett Favre, and that wasn't it? Anyway.
Yes.
But I agree with Bill. You can't dial football back. My first instinct, when you broached the story in the backstage available to BillWhittle.com members, is that, the worst thing that happened to boxing was to boxers was the invention of the boxing glove, because that just let these guys pound each other without hurting their hands. The thing that keeps your brain from rattling is the fact that a guy with a bare hand or just some cloth wrapped around, like Clint Eastwood in Every Which Way But Loose, is you can only hit so hard before you shatter your own fingers. And so boxers have been suffering brain injuries for decades now, and it's gotten worse as the training for these guys has gotten better and better, and they can just hit harder. There's only so much sloshing around the brain can take. So I believe that it is likely, it's not certain, that Brett Favre's Parkinson's disease is absolutely related to his many concussions on the football field. That said, how do you dial football back and keep it football? You can't take the pads away. You can't take it back to the 1920s and 30s, because there's a reason football evolved the way it did, and that's because it's a better game. It's a more exciting game with the big guys wearing the big pads and the big helmets just absolutely crushing each other. And also, it's communism if you try and change that. So is the answer in science? I think it's got to be. It's got to be in just better, more reactive armor, more protective armor, because
explosive reactive armor.
Which is, if you want to keep 2 big guys from hitting each other too hard, put little bomblets in the stuff, and they'll tone that stuff down. And when they don't, well, hey, better for the TV cameras. What I worry is, Scott, you mentioned the pipeline and the parents not wanting their 8-year-old kids get involved in this.
Yeah.
Would my parents let me play? Would they have stuck me in water polo in 8th grade? That would have sucked. But if that pipeline dries up, if lawsuits from injured players becomes the norm, then what's going to happen to football? It's just going to wither on the vine. So it is in the NFL's interest to find a up-armored solution for protecting these players, because if they don't, one way or another, we're going to lose football as we know it, and that would be communism.
Just one thing, Scotty, I'm sorry. You also have to ask yourself in this equation, how many professional quarterbacks play a lifetime career of pro football and do not develop Parkinson's?
Yeah, and this isn't really about the connection between concussions and any particular condition, because I know nothing about that. But it certainly has brought, once again, this subject to the public attention. And it's when I think about what's actually happening out there on the field. My favorite team currently, because I married into this and I share her joy in it, but is the Kansas City Chiefs. And Patrick Mahomes, the quarterback of the Kansas City Chiefs, weighs 225 pounds. Now, in real life, that's a good-sized guy. It's mostly pure, lean muscle. And so it's not like my 225 pounds, which would be like a stick figure with bags of Jell-O hanging in various places. So at 225, you think, well, that's a substantial man. He can take a beating. But some of these defensive linemen and defensive backs go upwards of 300 to 350 pounds. I think the heaviest ever NFL player was a guy named Ted Washington, weighing in at 375. And so you've got these huge guys who not only are huge, but they can leg press 400 to 600 pounds, and so they're fast and powerful. And when they generate a little momentum, their collision speed and impact kinetic force is tremendous. I saw Kirk Cousins, who's now with the Atlanta Falcons, longtime Minnesota Vikings quarterback, get blindsided this past weekend. And when that guy hit him and pancaked him to the ground, I thought, holy cow, Kirk's been in the game, I think, maybe 14 years. He's an older guy for the sport of football. You can't play that very long, especially when you're taking those kind of hits. And I do like equipment improvements. My suggestion for an equipment improvement is airbags that deploy above a certain pressure of impact that will cushion the blow for both players. But it occurred to me when I was hearing this story this morning. I was in the shower and I heard this story about concussions and Brett Favre, and then I thought about the thing that I saw this weekend indicating a couple of players on one team that were just this week out for concussions. And I thought, that's not how football was when I was playing football. Of course, I played between the ages of 7 and about 15. And for most of that time, football was played in weight groups. I think the smallest teams was like the 65-pound team, and then there was maybe an 80 or 90-pound team, and then there was like a 120-pound team. And so they didn't really take into account your age so much as they did your weight. And so every once in a while, you'd have some really young kid on the 120-pound team. But I thought, gee, I wonder if there's a way they could do that in the NFL, where essentially a 180 or 200-pound guy is never going to get in a collision with a 350-pound guy because they would be playing on different teams. There would be a different weight class for those guys. Now, this is an entirely unworkable, impractical solution.
Wait a minute. No, Scott. Scott, I think I know how to make it work. You know how they have team salary caps? You can only spend X number of dollars for the entire team. A team weight cap.
That's right.
You can spread that weight out however you want.
That's very clever.
Because you saw, I forget which game I was watching the other day, and that offensive line was just an unbelievable, it just looked like a whole rack of sides of beef. Just these tremendously large, fast men running.
We got 10 guys who weigh 140 pounds, and we've got a right corner who weighs 575 pounds.
Well, and when you think about it, the two guys who seem most in jeopardy are the quarterback and wide receivers in general, but just anybody who has to catch a pass. Because basically what we're saying to this guy is, okay, here's the idea, Pat. What I want you to do is I want you to stretch out your body, extend it fully out so that your arms are high in the air and your legs pointed straight out. And then we're going to send a guy who's been running for 10 or 15 yards, who weighs 325 pounds, and he's going to hit you right in the middle. And let's just see what happens.
When you put it like that.
What's the worst that can happen? And every once in a while, I get upset with players who unnecessarily put themselves at risk. So like I saw a guy run for a touchdown, and he was far enough away from everybody else that when he got to the end zone line, he jumped up in the air and did a flip and landed flat on his back. And I thought, you idiot. You've got a multi-million-dollar contract, and you just put your health at risk by jumping and doing this flip and then landing flat on your back. But later it occurred to me when I saw this whole concussion story, I was like, that's nothing for him. I mean, that's just, he's coming into contact with the planet, and the planet feels like it's stable underneath him. It's not a 350-pound freight train that's moving at him as fast as it could go. Anyway, I still have concern for the health of these players. After all, they're my fellow Americans, and they're people who worked all their lives to get very good at something. And I'm not going to be one of those guys who goes, you just toughen up, you sissies. You can take it. Back in my day, they knew how to dish it out, and you should have seen Dick Butkus hit Fran Tarkenton. You know, I do care about these guys. On the other hand, Steve's right. This is like the greatest game. This is a really engaging visual spectacle that keeps you on the edge of your seat in many cases through the whole thing. And so I'm hoping in dialogue between players and owners and fans and medical professionals, they're able to come up with ways to continue to reduce the incidence of injuries and specifically of concussions in this sport, because it is a beautiful game. And my grandfather devoted almost half of his life to it. And I would hate to see it go by the wayside because we couldn't figure out a way to play it and not kill people. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making Right Angle possible.